meant, what it was covering, what it was building, what it was quietly, methodically, irreversibly setting into motion. It would be New Year's Eve. And the ballroom would be full. I made it exactly 2 miles down the interstate before the ice forced me to turn back. Not fate. Not coincidence. Just frozen Virginia weather and a missing ice scraper I had left in Julian's car the week before. A practical problem requiring a practical solution. A brief, surgical return to the estate I had just resolved to leave behind forever. I told myself it would take 4 minutes. It took 4 minutes to change everything. I parked 2 streets over. Approached the Audi quietly, the neighborhood still sleeping in the pale 7 o'clock morning. I used my spare key fob, a habit from a time when I still believed we were a partnership, pressed the unlock button, and slid into the driver's seat. The interior smelled of expensive leather and designer cologne. Pristine. Carefully maintained. The physical manifestation of a man who spent considerable energy making sure surfaces looked flawless. I reached into the glove box for the scraper. My fingers found something else entirely. Tucked behind the vehicle registration and the owner's manual, deliberately, carefully hidden, was a rigid leather folio. Thick. Heavy. The kind of intentional concealment that normal wives walk past without registering. I am not a normal wife. I am a forensic accountant. Finding things people believe are invisible is not just my profession. It is the way my mind is wired. The moment my fingers touched that folio, every professional instinct I possess fired simultaneously. I opened it. Inside sat a stack of premium credit card statements for an account I had never seen, never discussed, never known existed. The balance on the first page stopped my breath cold. $45,212. I traced the line items with my gloved finger, my mind automatically categorizing, cross-referencing, building the architecture of the deception in real time. Patricia's quarterly country club dues, paid in full. Harper's Mercedes lease, covered every single month. A $12,000 charge from a Richmond jeweler, the panther necklace Patricia had worn to Thanksgiving dinner, the one Richard had accepted praise for, the anniversary gift everyone in that dining room had admired. The check written to the jeweler had bounced. Then the charge appeared on this secret card. I photographed every page. Then Julian's phone accidentally called mine. I held the device to my ear, and I listened, completely still, barely breathing, to a conversation happening less than 50 feet away inside the house I legally owned. "Once you secure the funding at the gala, you can drop her," Patricia said, her voice carrying the sharp, practiced authority of a woman who has never once been told no. She was only ever a placeholder. "You've outgrown her." I waited. In the silence that followed, I held onto a thread of something. Not hope exactly, but the last remaining filament of willingness to be wrong about the man I married. I waited for pushback. For discomfort. For the smallest, most basic flicker of loyalty. Julian left. Low. Conspiratorial. Completely at ease. "I'm already hiding the assets, Mom. It just takes time to untangle the accounts, so she doesn't notice." The filament snapped. I activated screen recording. Captured every word in high-definition audio. Then I photographed the remaining statements, replaced the folio precisely as I found it, grabbed the ice scraper from the passenger seat, and walked back to my Honda without looking at the house once. I drove north. 9 hours of silence. No radio. No phone calls. Just the white noise of Interstate 95 and the razor-sharp clarity of a mind no longer clouded by the faint, stubborn hope that people sometimes surprise you. They rarely do. The miles dissolved beneath my tires as the full picture assembled itself with sickening precision. Julian's startup had no software. No developers. No product of any kind. The seed capital his angel investors wired to Nexus Logistics wasn't funding a technology platform. It was funding Patricia's country club membership. Harper's car lease. Bespoke suits. Bounced checks covered by high-interest credit lines. Old investors paid with new investor money in the oldest, most desperate financial maneuver in existence. A Ponzi scheme, funded across state lines through digital banking networks. A federal crime with a specific name and a specific set of consequences. The New Year's Eve gala snapped into focus, no longer a pretentious holiday party, but an active hunting ground. Local politicians, municipal judges, wealthy investors clutching checkbooks, all of them targeted. All of them one signature away from becoming unwitting participants in a federal fraud investigation. I reached for my phone. 3 words to Marcus, my property attorney. Accelerate the timeline. Then one instruction that made him pause on the other end of the line. Service of process on December 31st, 11:45 at night. Why 11:45, he asked. I watched the Virginia state line disappear in my rearview mirror. Because I want the ballroom full. I didn't pack much for the drive back to Virginia. Just one thing hanging carefully in a garment bag behind the driver's seat. A floor-length midnight blue silk gown. High, elegant neckline. Architectural silhouette tailored by a private Manhattan designer who understood the difference between dressing a woman who wanted to be noticed and dressing a woman who had already decided the outcome. The fabric alone cost more than Harper's entire rented wardrobe. I didn't bring it to impress anyone. I brought it because when you walk into a room to dismantle an empire, you dress like you own the building. Which legally I did. The Nelson estate blazed with light as I turned into the cul-de-sac. A fleet of luxury sedans lined the curb. Valets shivered in thin uniforms. The warm amber glow of chandeliers spilled through every window, painting the frozen lawn gold. The precise aesthetic of prosperity that Patricia had spent her entire life manufacturing and her family had spent their entire future funding. I parked 2 streets over. Stepped out into the bitter December air without a coat. The midnight silk settled around me like liquid armor, and I walked toward the front doors, the same massive oak doors that had been deliberately locked against me exactly 7 days earlier, and stepped inside without breaking stride. The ballroom was everything desperate people perform when the walls are closing in. Crystal flutes, live string quartet, silver trays of imported appetizers, local politicians in tuxedos, wealthy investors holding leather-bound checkbooks. And somewhere behind the catering staging area, Patricia Nelson was personally funneling $15 bulk wine through a kitchen funnel into vintage European bottles, sealing the corks with practiced, unhurried confidence. She thought she was a master of illusion. She was the most perfect metaphor I had ever witnessed. Julian spotted me before I reached the ballroom entrance. The color left his face so completely and so instantly, it was almost architectural, like watching a building lose its load-bearing wall in real time. He abandoned his investor mid-sentence, crossed the room in urgent, uneven strides, grabbed my arm, and pulled me sideways with the frantic energy of a man watching his carefully constructed world develop a visible crack. "You need to leave," he hissed, his palms sweating through his tuxedo jacket.
"Right now.
"Before my investors see you." I looked down at his hand gripping my silk sleeve. I looked back up at his face. "Let go of me, Julian." Something in my voice, the complete, absolute absence of fear, made his fingers open immediately. Like a reflex. Like his own hands recognized an authority his ego was still refusing to process. He stepped back. Then Patricia arrived. She moved through the crowd with the territorial momentum of a woman who has never once questioned her right to occupy any room she enters. She stopped inches from my face, close enough that I could smell the gin beneath the expensive perfume, and she drew herself up to her full height with the practiced authority of decades of social dominance. "You are trespassing on my property," she announced, loudly, deliberately, pitching her voice to carry across the surrounding guests. She wanted witnesses. She wanted the room watching. She wanted the collective social weight of Virginia's elite to crush me back through the door I had dared to walk through. "Security, remove this woman immediately." The string quartet faltered. The room went still. And I walked to the podium. I inserted the flash drive into the AV console without a word, without a tremor, without a single moment of hesitation. The Nexus Logistics logo, Julian's monument to his own fabricated genius, vanished from the 80-inch projection screen. In its place, a financial spreadsheet filled the room with cold, undeniable blue light. "Good evening," I said, my voice moving through the professional sound system with the calm, measured authority of someone who has delivered difficult truths to powerful people in high-pressure rooms for her entire career. My name is Bridget. I'm a senior forensic accountant. I'm also Julian's wife. I clicked through the slides without hurry. The secret credit card balance, $45,000. The country club dues. Harper's Mercedes lease paid month after month with corporate funds. The $12,000 Panther necklace glowing on the screen beside a photograph of Patricia wearing it at Thanksgiving, her hand resting delicately at her throat while Richard accepted praise for a gift he never actually purchased. I watched the venture capitalist in the front row slowly lower his checkbook. I watched the municipal judge pull out his phone with the grim, efficient expression of a man already calculating the distance between himself and a federal investigation. Julian was not planning to pitch you a software company tonight, I said, holding the room in complete, suffocating silence. He was planning to pitch you a Ponzi scheme. Julian's knees buckled. He reached for the bar behind him. His elbow caught the edge of a towering pyramid of crystal champagne coupes. The entire structure came down in a single catastrophic cascade, dozens of glasses detonating against the hardwood floor in a sharp, sprawling explosion of sound that cut through the silence, like a verdict being read aloud. He stood in the wreckage, chest heaving, mouth opening and closing. "She's lying," he whispered. "She fabricated the files." The room didn't move toward him. It moved away. Not gradually. Not politely. All at once. The instinctive, collective recoil of intelligent people recognizing contamination and removing themselves from it with the unsentimental efficiency of self-preservation. Patricia stood frozen in the center of her ruined ballroom, her hand pressed against the necklace at her throat. Her aristocratic poise dissolved completely, leaving behind nothing but a woman staring at the undeniable mathematics of her own destruction projected in high definition across the wall of the home she'd known. I checked my watch. 11:42. 3 minutes early. Right on time. The ballroom was already a portrait of devastation. Guests streaming toward exits. Investors pocketing checkbooks. Politicians avoiding eye contact with the speed and practiced efficiency of people who have spent careers mastering the art of not being photographed near a scandal. The string quartet had abandoned their instruments entirely. Julian stood paralyzed in a constellation of shattered champagne glass, his stolen suit unable to absorb the magnitude of what had just happened to him. Patricia remained frozen at the center of her ruined empire, one hand pressed against the necklace at her throat, the other hanging uselessly at her side, a queen whose kingdom had just been publicly appraised and found fraudulent. They were finished. The evidence was irrefutable. The room had witnessed it. The legal machinery was already in motion. Any reasonable person standing in that ballroom understood with absolute clarity that the night was over, and the only dignified move remaining was to step aside and let the consequences arrive. Harper Nelson was not a reasonable person. She stepped out from behind the velvet curtains near the grand staircase with her smartphone raised high, arm fully extended, camera pointed directly at my face, the red recording light blinking with a steady, oblivious confidence of someone who has spent years believing that attention is the same thing as power. 80,000 followers. Live broadcast. Her final weapon deployed in the only battlefield she had ever learned to fight on. She didn't walk. She performed walking, pacing toward the stage with the manic, brittle energy of a woman who has just watched her entire world collapse and decided the correct response was to open her front-facing camera. "Look at this," she announced to her invisible audience, her voice pitched high and sharp, slicing through the heavy silence of the emptying room. "Look at my crazy, obsessive sister-in-law. She is so jealous of my family that she is literally projecting fabricated financial documents on a screen to ruin our New Year's Eve." She panned the camera toward the retreating guests, attempting to reframe their exodus as evidence of my instability rather than their own desperate self-preservation. "She broke into our home. She is harassing us. This is what toxic jealousy looks like, guys. This is what a complete psychological breakdown looks like in real time. She believed she was brilliant. She believed 80,000 followers constituted a force field capable of deflecting federal wire fraud charges. She believed that if she could flood the digital space with enough noise, enough outrage, enough performative victimhood, The truth projected on that screen behind her would somehow become negotiable. She had spent her entire adult life watching attention reshape reality on a phone screen. She had never once considered what happened when that phone was turned against her. I adjusted my stance at the podium, leaned slightly closer to the microphone. Let the room settle into the specific quality of silence that precedes something irreversible. Are you broadcasting live on Instagram right now, Harper? Yes, she snapped, thrusting the phone closer to my face, the red light pulsing triumphantly. Thousands of people are watching you fall apart, Bridget. Say hello to the internet before security removes you. I looked past her extended arm, past the glowing screen, past the desperate, performative fury in her eyes. My gaze found the AV technician sitting quietly behind his mixing console at the back of the room, the hired professional who had no investment in the Nelson family mythology, who was paid by the hour and therefore entirely indifferent to its collapse. I gave him a single, almost imperceptible nod. His fingers moved across the keyboard. The financial spreadsheets disappeared from the 80-inch screen. In their place, a single green audio waveform expanded slowly across the black background, rising and falling with the unhurried, inevitable rhythm of a truth that had been waiting patiently for exactly this moment. Harper's own voice filled the ballroom. Crisp, clear, unmistakable. Captured 3 days earlier on a recorded line while she stood at a boutique register demanding money for a sequin dress, so consumed by entitlement that she forgot the fundamental rule: never confess to someone who records conversations for a living. Julian only maxed out that secret business credit card because you're too cheap to support us the way a real wife should. He had to use his corporate line to buy mom's jewelry and pay my car lease because you refused to share your wealth. The waveform flatlined. The room stopped breathing. Harper stopped moving. The smartphone trembled in her outstretched hand, visibly, violently, the screen still broadcasting live to every single person who had tuned in to watch her expose her sister-in-law's supposed breakdown. Instead, they had just watched her expose herself. You just broadcast your own confession to 80,000 people, Harper, I said, my voice dropping to the quiet, precise register I reserve for the moment when the evidence is so complete that volume becomes unnecessary. You admitted you knew about the secret corporate credit card. You confirmed you knew investor funds were paying for your car and your mother's jewelry. You just confessed, live, on your own platform, to being a knowing accessory to federal wire fraud. The silence that followed was the most complete I have ever heard inside a building full of people. Then the phone slipped from her fingers. It hit the hardwood floor with a sharp, ugly crack, the screen spiderwebbing from corner to corner, the live broadcast ending in a single abrupt black flash. The connection to her fabricated world severed instantly. Permanently. Without ceremony. Harper's knees folded beneath her. She sank to the floor beside the broken device, both hands covering her face, not performing grief for an audience this time, but genuinely, privately, catastrophically undone by the realization that the weapon she had raised against me had fired directly backward. The golden child of the Nelson family, destroyed by her own platform, brought down not by my strategy, but by her own unshakable belief that she was the smartest person holding a camera. I didn't stay to watch them pack. That detail matters more than it might seem. Lesser versions of this story end with the protagonist standing over the ruins, surveying the wreckage, drinking in the slow collapse of the people who underestimated them. There is a version of me that stays in that ballroom until the last guest leaves, until the sheriff's deputies finish their paperwork, until Patricia finally removes her hand from her throat and accepts that the necklace is gone, and it isn't coming back. I am not that version. I had delivered the impact. The legal system would handle the debris, and I had a 9-hour drive back to New Jersey and a life, a real one, built on actual foundations, waiting for me on the other side of it. I walked out of the Nelson estate for the last time at 11:58 on New Year's Eve, the midnight blue silk whispering against the frozen porch steps, the same steps I had stood on exactly 1 week earlier in freezing sleet with 18 degrees pressing against my skin and a deadbolt between me and the warmth inside. The difference between those two moments, between that woman and this one, was not revenge. It was resolution. I drove north through the Virginia darkness, and I didn't look back once. The fallout was not a slow decline. When you sever the financial arteries of a parasite simultaneously and completely, the collapse is not gradual. It is immediate, total. The kind of implosion that doesn't leave rubble so much as a fine, irretrievable dust where something substantial used to be. The colonial estate sold within 2 weeks of eviction, renovated bathrooms, updated landscaping, listed on the open market, and closed at a significant premium over the initial debt I had assumed. Their monument to fabricated aristocracy became a profitable line item in my personal portfolio. Patricia's vanity project quietly and efficiently transformed into my financial gain. Julian was first to hit the ground. The Securities and Exchange Commission moved with the specific, unhurried ferocity of a federal agency that has been handed a complete, immaculate audit trail and doesn't need to work very hard to build its case. Nexus Logistics was dismantled, its assets seized, its corporate charter revoked with the bureaucratic finality of a door being permanently closed. Multiple federal indictments followed: wire fraud, identity theft, corporate malfeasance, each one a legal monument to the arrogance of a man who genuinely believed he was hiding assets from a forensic accountant. He now sits in budget attorney offices in Richmond, wearing his bespoke suits in rooms that smell of stale coffee and broken ambition, discovering with fresh, daily devastation that the discount legal representation he once laughed at is the only kind he can currently afford. The brochure he threw across my desk. That brochure. Harper's collapse was the most poetic, which feels appropriate, given that she spent her entire adult life curating aesthetics. The live confession broadcast to 80,000 followers did not generate the sympathy she anticipated. The internet, that brutal and magnificent arena, recognized the performance for exactly what it was and responded accordingly. The video was clipped, reposted, analyzed, and mocked across platforms with the specific merciless efficiency of a digital audience that has no patience for entitled fraudsters caught on their own cameras. Brand sponsorships evaporated overnight. The luxury rental services, the handbags, the accessories, the carefully sourced props of her fabricated lifestyle canceled her accounts simultaneously. The white Mercedes was repossessed 3 weeks into January when the lease payments stopped processing. Last I heard from Marcus, Harper had secured employment at a mid-tier cosmetics counter in a suburban shopping mall. 8 hours a day on her feet. Minimum wage. Fluorescent lighting. A name tag instead of a ring light. A far, devastating cry from the yacht decks and regatta weekends she had built her entire identity performing. Richard and Patricia experienced something arguably worse than financial ruin. They experienced social annihilation, which for Patricia was not a consequence. It was an execution. The Oak Creek Country Club revoked their membership the morning after the gala, the motion spearheaded by the same real estate developer and municipal judge who had been standing in that ballroom holding champagne glasses when the spreadsheets appeared on the screen. Terrified of federal contamination, they moved with extraordinary speed to excommunicate the Nelsons from every social structure they had spent decades cultivating. Patricia's name became a cautionary whisper exchanged over expensive luncheons she was no longer invited to attend. They relocated to a small rental duplex 2 towns over. Patricia Nelson, the woman who policed floral arrangements at charity events, who introduced me to federal judges as a tax preparer, who locked her front door against a woman standing in 18-degree sleet because she didn't fit the aesthetic, now clips coupons and crosses the street to avoid eye contact with anyone who used to consider her a peer. 3 months after New Year's Eve, spring sunlight washed across the polished concrete floors of my Newark office. My managing director walked in carrying a silver tray, vintage champagne, 2 crystal flutes, the specific energy of a moment that has been genuinely earned. Congratulations on the promotion. Senior partner looks good on you. We clinked glasses. The sound rang clean and clear through the quiet room. That evening, a text arrived from an unsaved number. I recognized the syntax immediately. The fragmented, desperate rhythm of a man who has run out of every option and arrived, inevitably, back at the only door that was ever actually open to him. Bridget, please. I'm so sorry. I lost everything. Can we just talk? Please give me a second chance.
Julian.
I read the words once. I felt nothing. Not triumph. Not satisfaction. Not the sharp, vindicating pleasure of watching someone finally understand the weight of what they destroyed. Not even pity, which surprised me slightly because pity requires a residual connection, some remaining thread of investment in the other person's experience. There was no thread left. Just the profound, clean, almost physical weightlessness of total indifference. The feeling of a woman who has already moved so completely forward that looking backward requires a conscious, deliberate effort she has no interest in making. They locked me out in 18-degree weather because I didn't fit their aesthetic. They were right. I never did. I didn't fit the aesthetic of borrowed money performing as generational wealth. I didn't fit the aesthetic of cheap wine poured carefully into expensive bottles and served to people too distracted by the label to taste the difference. I didn't fit the aesthetic of a family that confused the appearance of success with the actual architecture of it, that built their entire identity on a foundation of leveraged debt, manufactured prestige, and the quiet, daily cruelty of making someone feel small so they could feel large by comparison. I didn't fit any of that. And the most important thing I ever did, more important than purchasing their mortgage, more important than building the legal case, more important than walking into that ballroom in midnight blue silk with a flash drive and 9 months of irrefutable evidence, was deciding, years before Christmas Eve, that not fitting their aesthetic was not a deficiency. It was a distinction. There is a specific kind of person this world chronically underestimates. They drive sensible cars. They wear practical shoes. They don't announce their net worth at dinner parties or perform their ambition for audiences who need to be impressed. They ask careful questions and listen to the complete answer. They build slowly, deliberately, without fanfare, pouring their energy into foundations rather than facades, into portfolios rather than appearances, into the quiet, unglamorous, deeply satisfying work of constructing something that actually holds weight when the world pushes back against it. The Patricius of this world look at that person and see limitation. They see someone who doesn't understand how the game is played. Someone who lacks the sophistication to recognize that image is currency and performance is power. Someone safe to dismiss, safe to belittle, safe to lock out in the freezing rain, because what are they really going to do about it? What they never consider, what their arrogance structurally prevents them from considering, is that the quiet person in the corner isn't lost. They're calculating. They're watching the cash flow. They're reading the fine print. They're building the kind of patient, precise, unshakable leverage that doesn't announce itself until the moment it becomes absolutely, catastrophically undeniable. The most dangerous person in any room is never the loudest one. It is the one who already knows how the story ends and is simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. I want to talk directly to you for a moment. Not the general you. You, the specific person watching this right now, maybe at your desk, maybe on your phone, maybe in a car or a kitchen or a quiet room at the end of a long day that required more grace than it deserved. If any part of Bridget's story landed somewhere real inside you, if you recognized the locked door, the dismissive text, the room full of people performing a life they couldn't actually afford while making you feel inadequate for building one you genuinely owned, then you already understand something fundamental that a lot of people spend their entire lives missing. Character is not loud. Integrity doesn't require an audience. And the life you build in silence, brick by careful brick, with your actual hands and your actual values and your absolute refusal to compromise the foundation for the sake of appearances, that life is unassailable in a way that no amount of cashmere, country club membership, or Instagram followers can touch or threaten or take from you. They can lock the door. They cannot lock the deed. They can turn off the porch light. They cannot extinguish what you've already built in the dark. They can dismiss you at a dinner party, reduce your career to a footnote, seat you at the wrong end of the table, exclude you from the photograph, write you off as someone who simply doesn't understand how their world operates. And you can smile, and nod, and quietly continue building the thing that will one day make their entire world a line item on your balance sheet. That is not revenge. That is architecture. If this story resonated with something in you, if you've ever been underestimated by someone who never bothered to read the fine print of who you actually are, I want you to do one thing right now.
Subscribe.
Hit the notification bell. Leave your age in the comments below. Not because this channel needs the numbers, but because I genuinely want to know who is sitting in this room with us. who has lived a version of this story, who is currently in the middle of one, who needed to hear today that the quiet, careful, deliberate way they are moving through the world is not weakness. It is the longest game, and it wins every time. This channel exists for people who understand that the most powerful statement you can make is not the one you scream across a ballroom. It is the one you execute, precisely, patiently, and in absolute silence, while everyone else is busy performing. The receipts always outlast the performance. They always have. And somewhere out there is a Patricia who has no idea that the person she just dismissed is already 3 moves ahead, building something she will never see coming until it arrives at her front door at 11:45 on New Year's Eve, with a sheriff and a deed bearing their name. Welcome to the channel. I'll see you in the next one.